The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, stamped with the HOA's official seal. Immediate removal of the structure in your backyard. It demanded. My son's tree fort, the place where laughter echoed, where memories were built, was suddenly branded illegal. How could a simple wooden fort, built with love, be considered a violation? The fines piled up faster than I could count, and every attempt to reason with the HOA felt like walking into a storm. And then I realized, maybe they didn't just want the fort gone. Maybe they wanted to break me. Could I find a way to fight back without losing everything? Life in our neighborhood had always felt like a scene from a storybook. Tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes without helmets, neighbors who waved across the cul-de-sac, all the small joys that make a community feel like home. Our house sat near the center of it all, a modest two-story with a backyard my son had claimed as his kingdom. Summers were spent building forts, climbing trees, and inventing imaginary adventures that ended with scraped knees and laughter echoing under the sun. We weren't flashy people. We gardened, hosted occasional barbecues, and tried to blend in. But I loved giving my son a space of his own, a sanctuary where he could feel in charge, even if only over a wooden platform in the branches. The tree fort became more than wood and nails. It became a symbol of freedom, imagination, and family. I never suspected that the very thing I celebrated every weekend would one day draw the attention of the HOA, the shadowy committee that dictated every paint color, fence height, and garden gnome in the neighborhood. Their rules seemed harmless at first. Guidelines meant to keep the streets tidy. But as subtle whispers from other neighbors hinted at violations, a creeping unease settled over our idyllic corner. I felt it before I saw the letter, something about our little backyard haven might not be as safe from scrutiny as I had thought. And yet, life continued. Dinners on the patio, late night talks under the stars, and the comforting routine of a quiet, predictable neighborhood. We had no idea that soon the rules meant to protect our community would become a weapon against us, and that the joy of a child's play would ignite a war neither of us were prepared for. The first notice came as a thin envelope slipped under our front door. No warning, no conversation. Just an official-looking letter with sharp, typed words. Immediate removal of non-permitted structures. That structure, our son's tree fort, had never seemed threatening to anyone. Yet, according to the HOA, it violated a rule so obscure it felt invented on the spot. A wooden platform among the branches, a small rope ladder, and a slide were suddenly an existential threat to the neighborhood's moral and visual order. At first, I tried reasoning. I sent polite emails, even printed blueprints showing the fort's safety. I explained that it was a labor of love, built under my supervision, and posed no danger to anyone. The replies were curt, almost robotic, citing community standards and unspecified hazards. There was no human voice, only bureaucratic insistence. But the tension had already started to seep into our home, the calm of our evenings replaced by a low, simmering dread every time the mail arrived. Soon, the HOA escalated. Fines appeared, first small, then cumulatively absurd. Each week brought a new charge, sometimes with threats of legal action or liens against our property. The notes were punctuated with reminders that failure to comply could result in further enforcement. We weren't breaking the law, just some vague, arbitrarily enforced guideline, but it didn't matter. The system itself was weaponized. Neighbors began watching. Some offered quiet sympathy. Others whispered about how the Johnsons must be hiding something. The word spread, subtle but corrosive. Our tree fort became the center of attention, the focus of suspicion. My son's laughter, once a soundtrack to sunny weekends, was now tinged with confusion. He didn't understand why the fort was suddenly wrong, why the adults in his neighborhood were wielding rules like swords. I began documenting everything: letters, emails, photos of the fort, even videos of our weekends spent in it. I researched the HOA's bylaws, uncovering clauses that were so vague they could be stretched to justify nearly anything. The more I read, the more I realized how little actual oversight the HOA had from legal authorities, yet how much power they wielded over daily life. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong word could trigger another fine, another letter, another escalation. Tensions reached a new peak the day they sent an inspector. A middle-aged man in a crisp polo, clipboard in hand, arrived unannounced, circling the fort with an air of suspicion that made my blood boil. He pointed to each corner, each nail, each plank, as if searching for a hidden crime. My son stood beside me, eyes wide, gripping the rope ladder, unsure if this man would take his sanctuary away. The inspector left with a curt nod, promising a report to the board, and that evening, a fresh notice arrived demanding immediate compliance. I started hearing whispers of other homeowners being penalized for equally trivial infractions. Garden gnomes, mailbox colors, patio umbrellas. It became clear the HOA thrived on fear, control, and petty enforcement. But the more they pressed, the more determined I became. If they wanted a battle, they would get one. My evenings transformed into strategy sessions, calls to lawyers, researching local ordinances, and plotting ways to protect our home without crossing legal boundaries. Every page I read about homeowners' rights felt like uncovering a hidden arsenal of potential defiance. Then came the rumor of a neighborhood vote, a gathering meant to discuss community compliance. I could feel the tension rising even before the meeting. Families whispered in hallways. Glances were exchanged like coded warnings. Some neighbors saw the tree fort as a harmless relic of childhood. Others saw it as a symbol of rebellion against their orderly, sanitized vision of suburban life. And I realized something chilling. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were enforcing conformity. As the fines mounted, the threats grew, and the pressure intensified, I began to notice a strange pattern. Every complaint or notice arrived immediately after my polite attempts at compromise. Every inspection seemed timed to coincide with weekends when I might be distracted. It wasn't random. It was personal. My son's fort had become a battlefield, and we were living at the mercy of people who had no stake in our happiness, only in the appearance of control. And then, the final straw, a letter threatening legal action if the fort was not removed by the following week. The wording left no room for negotiation. My son asked why they hated his fort, and I didn't have an answer that made sense. That night, I stared at the tree, the platform, the ropes, and the memories built into each plank, and a plan began to form, a plan that might turn the tables on the HOA in a way they never anticipated. I knew that the next step would be risky, maybe even defiant, but it was the only way to protect what mattered. I also knew the entire neighborhood was about to witness what happens when a family refuses to bend to petty authority. The storm was coming, and there was no turning back. The morning of the final confrontation dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that makes every shadow feel like a threat. I stood in the backyard, staring up at the tree fort, every plank and rope illuminated by the muted sunlight, thinking about the weeks of letters, fines, and inspections. My son clung to my leg, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. This wasn't just about a tree fort anymore. It was about standing up against an invisible authority that had overstepped, that had taken joy and turned it into a battleground. I had spent hours crafting a plan. Every blueprint, every photo, every legal loophole was ready. The idea was simple, but bold: transform the fort into something untouchable. Something that highlighted their own absurdity, while remaining within the letter of the law. But executing it meant walking a fine line between defiance and legality, and the stakes felt enormous. By mid-morning, the HOA's representatives arrived. 3 people, perfectly coiffed, clipboards in hand. Their faces set in the expression of people who believed they were enforcers of moral order. They didn't knock. They marched straight to the fort, eyes scanning, measuring, judging. My palms were sweaty, my heart thudding in anticipation. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The fort was about to speak for itself. The first inspection went as expected. They criticized the angles of the wooden beams, the rope knots, the spacing of the planks. Every sentence was punctuated with threats. This is non-compliant. You must remove it immediately. Failure to do so will result in penalties. But I had prepared. I calmly handed them the permits I had secured, evidence that transformed the fort from illegal to a meticulously legal structure. Their expressions flickered with surprise, confusion, and then irritation. By noon, neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by whispers of a showdown. Some peeked from behind curtains, others leaned over fences, cameras ready. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Every eye was on us, every breath measured, every movement scrutinized. I could feel my son's small hand in mine, gripping tightly, and I realized this moment was as much for him as it was for me. This was about protecting a childhood, a home, and a sense of autonomy. Then came the audacious move. Using hidden reinforcements and decorative elements that complied fully with local building codes, I began transforming the tree fort into a luxury deck, a multi-tiered structure with safety railings, planters, and seating that subtly mocked the petty regulations they had cited. Every plank placement was deliberate. Every addition a statement. This is our space. You cannot touch it. The HOA inspectors' jaws dropped as they realized the fort was now a deck that exceeded all safety codes and community standards. One of the board members, red-faced and flustered, attempted to argue, citing vague rules about aesthetic harmony. But every attempt to enforce compliance collapsed under the weight of law, logic, and undeniable evidence of safety and regulation. I could feel a shift, a subtle change in power, as their authority crumbled in real time. The people who had terrorized us for weeks now had nothing. Their intimidation tactics were impotent against preparation, research, and courage. The crowd of neighbors whispered among themselves. Some clapped silently, others nodded in approval. Even those who had criticized us before seemed stunned by the boldness and precision of our response. It wasn't just a victory for a wooden fort. It was a demonstration of what can happen when a family refuses to bow to arbitrary authority. Every fine, every letter, every threat had led to this moment. A moment of undeniable vindication. My son's laughter returned, ringing out over the yard as he explored the new deck, climbing safely and marveling at the plants and seating areas. For the first time in weeks, he was free to play without fear. I felt a mix of relief and exhilaration, knowing that our defiance had not just protected his sanctuary but also exposed the absurdity of the HOA's rules for all to see. But even in victory, there was tension. The HOA had been humiliated publicly, their power eroded, but I knew this wouldn't be the last letter, the last threat, or the last attempt at control. The moment was victorious yet fragile, a victory born of courage, strategy, and resilience. I realized that standing up for what's right often means taking risks, enduring scrutiny, and confronting fear head-on. As the inspectors left, muttering among themselves, I looked at my son and asked silently, "Did we really win? Or is this just the beginning?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with possibility, as the sun began to set over our transformed backyard. A symbol of triumph, resistance, and the power of refusing to be bullied. The storm had passed, but the ripple of this confrontation would echo through the neighborhood for a long time. The weeks after the showdown were surreal. The HOA's representatives never returned, at least not in the same menacing way. Their authority, once absolute in the cul-de-sac, seemed diminished, their threats reduced to whispers behind closed doors. The tree fort, transformed into a fully compliant, multi-tiered luxury deck, stood as a visible testament to what preparation, research, and determination could achieve. Every rope, every plank, every carefully constructed corner reflected months of tension, sleepless nights, and quiet defiance. Neighbors began approaching cautiously at first. Some offered congratulations in hushed tones, others in open smiles. What had been a divisive symbol, my son's fort, became a talking point, a shared understanding of courage in the face of arbitrary power. Even those who had been critical before now acknowledged, without needing to say it, that we had acted boldly, but within reason, defending not just our home but the principle that joy, imagination, and family space shouldn't be criminalized. The impact on our family was profound. My son's laughter returned fully, untainted by fear or confusion. He spent hours exploring the new deck, inventing adventures that now incorporated planters, seating areas, and hidden nooks. I watched him reclaim the kind of unburdened, fearless childhood I had hoped for him, and I realized that our fight had protected far more than wood and nails. It had protected his sense of wonder, autonomy, and trust that adults could act in his interest. At the same time, the HOA itself began to show cracks under scrutiny. Other homeowners, inspired by our example, started questioning rules, fines, and inspections. One by one, the community began to demand clarity, fairness, and transparency from an organization that had long operated under the guise of authority, without accountability. We didn't just win a personal battle, we sparked a subtle, but powerful shift in neighborhood culture. People realized that compliance should never come at the expense of common sense or decency. The legal side of the dispute faded into the background as the HOA, humiliated and overexposed, retreated. They continued to send letters, but they were met with polite but firm rebuttals citing regulations, safety standards, and previously documented communications. Every attempt to intimidate or coerce was deflected, not with anger but with preparation, evidence, and calm confidence. It was a lesson I would carry forever. Knowledge and meticulous planning can neutralize even the most overbearing authority. Emotionally, the experience left scars but also resilience. My family learned the strength of standing together against injustice, the importance of documenting, researching, and speaking up, and the value of maintaining calm under pressure. Our bond deepened in ways subtle yet profound. We had weathered a storm that could have torn others apart, and we emerged stronger. The fort, now a deck, became a daily reminder that courage, strategy, and integrity can protect what truly matters. Beyond the personal, the broader neighborhood shifted. Conversations became less about petty rules and more about mutual respect. Families who had once nodded in fear now felt empowered to question authority and advocate for themselves. Our stand had set an example. You do not have to accept absurdity silently, you can assert your rights without descending into chaos. The sense of community, previously overshadowed by fear and compliance, began to feel real again, balanced, fair, and human. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized that the battle wasn't truly about a tree fort or a deck. It was about power, fairness, and the right to live and play without undue interference. The fight reminded me that vigilance is necessary. That authority, when unchecked, can become tyrannical, and that standing firm doesn't require arrogance, only courage and preparation. Our victory wasn't loud or sensational, but it was undeniable, and it reverberated far beyond our backyard. Even months later, when we hosted barbecues on the deck, neighbors would pause, glance up, and nod with recognition or quiet approval. There was a subtle shift in the way people interacted with the HOA, a collective understanding that arbitrary enforcement could be challenged, that families could defend themselves with dignity and evidence. The atmosphere of fear that had once dominated the cul-de sac gradually gave way to one of cautious respect, accountability, and restored balance. For my son, the deck is a playground, a fortress, and a classroom all in one. For me, it is a monument to resilience, creativity, and the power of refusing to bow to petty tyranny. And for the neighborhood, it is a reminder that courage is contagious, that one family's stand can illuminate the flaws in an entire system, and that fairness is achievable when people act decisively and thoughtfully. Looking back, I often ask myself what would have happened if we had quietly complied. The thought is sobering. The fort would be gone, the laughter silenced, and the lesson lost. Instead, we chose a path that was difficult, exhausting, and fraught with risk. But it yielded far more than just a victory over bureaucracy. It restored confidence, nurtured imagination, and reminded a community that rules exist to serve people, not suppress them. And so, the deck stands today, not as a trophy of defiance, but as a symbol of what can happen when courage meets preparation, when love meets strategy, and when a family refuses to let fear dictate their lives. The HOA may continue to exist, rules may still be written and enforced, but the story of the tree fort, turned luxury deck, has changed the narrative forever. It is a story of resilience, of standing tall against unnecessary authority, and of protecting what truly matters. In the end, I wonder, how many other families remain silent under similar pressures, willing to let fear and bureaucracy take away their joy? And I hope that seeing this story, our story, might inspire others to stand, to plan, and to reclaim what is theirs, with courage, dignity, and unwavering resolve. The tree fort taught us more than play. It taught us the meaning of perseverance, justice, and the enduring power of home.